Wren Ashcombe had killed 11 men before her 25th birthday. She had never lost sleep over any of them. She reminded herself of that fact as she adjusted the collar of her servant's dress and walked through the iron gates of Dravenhold, the great fortress that sat at the edge of the northern hills like a scar on the land. The guards barely glanced at her. She had chosen her disguise well. Plain clothes, a basket of folded linens, eyes cast downward. She looked like someone who belonged nowhere important. That was exactly the point. The Order of the Silent Blade had given her 3 weeks to complete the assignment. The target was Cale Draven, the man the northern people called the Dragon King, not because he breathed fire, but because his family crest bore a black dragon, and because everything he touched seemed to either conquer or burn. He was 30 years old, unmarried, and had spent the last 5 years pulling the fractured northern clans together under a single banner. The rival kingdom of Valdris had grown nervous. Nervous kingdoms paid well, and so Wren had been sent. She spent her first 3 days doing nothing but watching. She watched the rotation of the guards, the rhythm of the kitchens, the way the corridors emptied after the evening bell. She watched the servants move through the great hall with their heads down and their steps quick, as though the air inside Dravenhold required a certain kind of quiet. She memorized the distance from her sleeping quarters to the east wing, where Cale's private study sat at the end of a long, torchlit hallway. On the 4th night, she decided it was time. She mixed the contact poison into a thin film across the surface of her ring, a simple silver band that looked like nothing at all. One press against his skin, and within the hour, it would appear as though he had simply fallen ill. Clean, untraceable, professional. She moved through the corridor like smoke, silent in soft-soled shoes, the blade at her thigh a comfort she hoped she wouldn't need. The study door was slightly open, warm light spilling through the gap. She pressed her back to the wall and listened. No voices, no movement. She pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. Cale Draven was standing at the window with his back to her. He was taller than she had expected. He wore a plain dark shirt, no armor, no ceremony. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he had run his hands through it too many times. On the desk beside him sat a half-eaten plate of bread and cheese, and a map covered in ink marks and small stones used as position markers. He looked, in that moment, less like a king, and more like a man who had been working too long and sleeping too little. Wren crossed the room without a sound. She was 3 steps away. 2. She raised her hand. And then he turned around. It wasn't suspicion that turned him. He had simply heard something outside the window and moved to look. He turned, and their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Wren had looked into the eyes of men who were about to die. Some begged, some went cold with fear, some tried to bargain. Cale Draven did none of those things. He looked at her with a steadiness that stopped her where she stood, as though he had simply been interrupted in the middle of a thought, and was waiting patiently to finish it. Then he said, quietly, "You're not a servant." It wasn't a question. Wren kept her face still. Her hand was raised, the ring turned inward. One touch was all it required. "I know what you are," he continued, without moving toward her or away from her. "I noticed you the second day. The way you watch the room instead of the floor, the way you count the guards." He tilted his head slightly. "I've had people try to kill me before. They never looked quite like you, though." "Like what?" she said. She hadn't planned to speak. "Like you were disappointed to find me here alone." Wren didn't answer that. She didn't lower her hand either. Cale moved, slowly and deliberately, to his desk, and sat down on the edge of it with his arms crossed loosely over his chest. He looked entirely at ease, which made no sense at all. "If you're going to do it," he said, "go ahead. I'm not going to call the guards." "You're not afraid," she said. "I didn't say that." He looked at her steadily. "But I'd rather spend my last few minutes talking to someone interesting than shouting for help that would only arrive too late." A faint expression crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile. "Stay a little longer. Just a little. And then, if you still want to, you can do what you came to do." Wren stood very still for a long moment. Then she lowered her hand. She was not sure, later, why she did it. She told herself it was strategy, that leaving without completing the mission gave her a chance to reassess and return under better conditions. She told herself it was practical. She did not examine the other reason too closely. She sent word to the order that she needed more time. She did not explain why. Over the following days, Cale neither exposed her nor avoided her. He simply behaved as though she were exactly what she was pretending to be, a new member of the household staff. He greeted her in the corridors with a brief nod. He did not stare. He did not seek her out. And somehow, that made it worse. The hunting trip happened by accident. A riding party was assembled on short notice, and Wren was among the servants chosen to accompany them. She spent most of the morning at the edge of the group, half watching the hills, half watching Cale, who rode at the front and spoke quietly with his captain. On the ride back, his horse fell slightly behind the others, and without planning it, she found herself riding beside him. "You haven't left," he said. "Not yet," she replied. "Why?" She thought about that for a moment. "I haven't decided if I'm going to." He was quiet for a while, watching the tree line. Then he said, "Can I tell you something that might sound strange?" He didn't wait for her answer. "I was 13 when my father was killed by someone he trusted completely. A man who had sat at our table every week for years." He paused. "After that, I learned to notice things, small things, the way people look at doors, the way they hold still when they should be moving. I've spent a long time watching for people who might want me dead." "And?" Wren said. "And I've never looked at someone I was watching for and felt anything other than tired." He glanced at her briefly. "Until you." Wren said nothing. She kept her eyes forward. But she stayed. 3 more days passed. Then the attack came. It came at night, through the western wall. A small, well-trained unit, 6 men, moving fast and quiet. Wren heard them before the fortress bells rang. She was already in the corridor when the shouting started, and she moved not toward the exit, as she should have, but toward the east wing. What she found in the hallway outside Cale's study stopped her cold. A man she recognized. His name was Davin, and he was the best blade the order had sent besides herself. She understood immediately what had happened. The order had grown impatient. They had sent him to finish the job if she wouldn't. Davin looked at her without surprise. "Stand aside, Wren." "No," she said. He moved first. He was fast, and he was good, and the fight was short and brutal, and nothing like the stories people told about battles. When it was over, Wren stood in the hallway alone, breathing hard, and Cale was standing in the open doorway of his study looking at her. He had seen enough of it to understand what had happened. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "He was sent by the same people who sent you," Cale said. "Yes. And you've been here all this time with your original instructions still in place." "Yes," she said again. He was quiet for a moment. There was a cut along his forearm where he had caught the edge of something during the chaos elsewhere in the fortress. He didn't seem to notice it. He was looking at her with that same steadiness she had seen the first night. Only now there was something else in it, something more careful and more open. "Why?" he asked. Just that one word. Wren leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for a moment. She was tired, in a way that went deeper than the night's fight. She was tired in a way she hadn't let herself feel in years. "When you turned around that first night," she said slowly, "and you looked at me, you weren't afraid, you weren't angry, you just looked at me like I was a person." She opened her eyes. "I haven't been looked at like that in a very long time." Cale didn't say anything for a moment. Then he stepped forward and sat down on the floor of the hallway with his back against the wall, the most unroyal posture she had ever seen, and said, "Sit down, please." She sat. "I meant what I said on the road," he told her. "From the moment I saw you, I stopped wanting to die. Not out of fear. I've made my peace with the fact that someone was going to come for me eventually. But I thought, if I can just have one honest conversation with this woman, just one real one, that would be worth fighting for." Wren looked at him. "That's a very strange reason to refuse to die." "I know," he said. Something shifted in her chest, slow and unfamiliar. She didn't try to name it. The order did not let things end quietly. Wren had known they wouldn't. She had defected before, briefly, from a mission she found unjust, and the order had made her regret it for months. This was larger. She had refused the assignment, protected the target, and killed one of their own operatives. There would be consequences. They came in the form of a letter delivered openly to Dravenhold's gates, a formal notice that Wren Ashcombe was now considered a rogue operative and that all affiliated parties who harbored her did so at their own risk. She read it standing in Cale's private study, where the map on his desk had changed shape several times over the past weeks, as negotiations with the northern clans continued quietly, successfully, tile by tile. "They're sending a team," she said. 5, maybe 6, within the week. "How do you know?" "Because it's what I would do." Cale looked at the letter, and then at her. "What do you need?" The question was simple and direct, and it hit her somewhere unexpected. Not "what are you going to do?" or "what does this mean for me?" Just "what do you need?" "I need your fastest riders to change the fortress entry points. I need to know who among your guards I can trust completely, and I need 3 days to prepare." "You have all of it," he said. "Just like that?" He looked up from the map. "You protected this fortress. You protected me. I would be a poor kind of leader if I left you to face your old employers alone." She didn't argue. She had learned by then that Cale Draven meant what he said. It was a quality she found increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. The Order's team arrived on the 5th night, and they were good. But Wren had trained with people like them, and she knew their methods the way she knew her own breathing. She had redirected the guard patterns, blocked the 3 entry points they would most naturally favor, and positioned Cale's best men where they would be least expected. The confrontation was tense and carefully handled. There was no great battle. Wren intercepted the team before they breached the inner walls, and with Cale's captain beside her and 2 guards flanking them, she made the Order's operatives a simple, clear offer: withdraw and report that the mission had failed due to target security, or face the consequences of a full diplomatic incident between the Order and the Dragon King's unified northern territory. She knew which way they would choose. The Order valued invisibility above all else. A diplomatic incident was the last thing they wanted. They withdrew before dawn. Wren stood in the courtyard watching them go, and she felt the particular, hollow exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from reaching the end of something long and difficult. Behind her she heard footsteps she recognized. "Is it over?" Cale asked. "For now," she said honestly. "They'll file the mission as a failure and move on to other work. But the Order has a long memory. This won't be the last complication." "I know." He came to stand beside her. Not too close, but close enough that she was aware of him, in the quiet way she had grown used to. A warmth she had stopped trying to argue herself out of. "Are you planning to stay?" She considered the question seriously. She had no home to return to, no family to go back to. The Order had been the only structure she'd known since childhood, and she had walked away from it deliberately and without regret. What she had now was uncertain, complicated, and entirely unlike anything she had planned for herself. She looked at him. "I'm not good at staying," she said. "I don't know how to be in one place. I don't know how to trust people easily. I'm going to be difficult." "I know," he said again. "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." He met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to be uncomplicated, Wren. I'm asking if you're staying." She turned back to the courtyard, to the pale edge of morning light beginning to show above the hills. She thought about a 13-year-old boy who had learned to watch for danger and had spent his life behind walls, not so different from her own. She thought about the first night, and the steadiness in his eyes, and the strange grace of being looked at like a person. "Yes," she said. "I'm staying." He didn't say anything more, and neither did she. They stood together in the early quiet as the sky grew lighter, 2 people who had both been alone for a very long time, figuring out, slowly and without any certainty of ease, what it might mean to stop being.